Welcome to the target stream for Mint Press News. I'm your host, Robert Inlakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Iran has opened fire on a vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. The Trump administration has reportedly accepted Israel's request that they continue occupying South Lebanon. And so Israel's taken that as a green light to restart its offensive to try and take more areas in the south of the country. The Yemeni armed forces are mobilizing, and militia forces in Syria are also mobilizing at the order of Damascus alongside the Lebanese border. It also appears as if Hezbollah's ambush just over a week ago has exposed Israel's use of private military contractors in the south of the country. But before we begin, the target stream is 100% viewer funded as a show. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal and had our fundraisers taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They even withheld our funds. So we are looking for 300 new members to keep this news show alive. And this is Thursday's show. We're also doing shows every single Monday as well as Thursdays at 4 p.m. CST. So with that all being said, we've got quite a bit to go through because despite the fact that we're told that there is a ceasefire in Lebanon and there's a memorandum of understanding which apparently freezes the conflict between the United States and Iran, it doesn't seem that things are really going to plan. Or maybe this is all part of the plan, but we'll get into all of that. And as we look also of what's been happening on the ground in Lebanon right now, just about half an hour ago, the Israelis decided to violate and break the ceasefire. They're now launching a wave of airstrikes across the south of Lebanon. As to be expected, Hezbollah respected the ceasefire for 5 days. The Israelis, after the second day, were killing Lebanese civilians every single day. Hezbollah put out a number of announcements saying that it was monitoring the situation, but continued to abide by the ceasefire. Some people would ask why they would bother, because the Israelis now are trying to advance upon two different areas further past a place called Bint Jbeil, and then also as well to the Ali Tahir Hills, which is past the Litani River area. We'll get all into that. But the Israelis have not faced zero resistance. They've faced quite a bit of resistance. And as of now, there have been 4 Israeli helicopter medevac operations that have taken place. Israeli media have reported on 4 Israeli casualties. They said that 1 is dead, 2 are in critical condition. But the fact that there's been 4 different helicopters evacuating their bodies is a little bit, that puts that number of 4 casualties into question. But we will monitor that as we go in the live stream. But the first thing to look at now, this is some of the images coming out from Haifa, the Israeli soldiers that are being evacuated. So that is an ongoing event. We will get back to that, especially when we cover the footage that's been coming out of South Lebanon. So with all that being said, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz as well has also destabilized, if we can call it as such. And there has been an escalation. Oman announced that they were opening a new route in the Strait of Hormuz for ships to civilian vessels to pass through. They did not inform the Iranians of this. And it's evident because of the threats that have been coming from Washington that Oman have sort of done this to placate the United States. And this has resulted in quite a bit of a disaster. So we'll take a look at that. So Iran initially warned, this was this morning, warned ships that it's unacceptable and dangerous to transit the Strait of Hormuz without their approval. This is in reference to these ships trying to use another route, which is the alternative one to that Iran had put forth. Now, there is a little bit of truth to this, that if they do take the wrong route, and it's not coordinated with the other side, some are taking different routes, then this could cause potential collisions between civilian vessels. And so these tankers could end up being in a lot of trouble. And of course, the Iranians, though, are not wanting the United States to try and assert its dominance, which is what it's trying to do here, which is a bad sign for this memorandum of understanding, amidst maybe at least 10 or 11 other bad signs that we've seen come forth. So what happened is the IRGC Navy put out this call. We'll just play it here.
Attention all vessels, attention all vessels, attention all vessels in Persian Gulf and Oman Sea. This is SEPA Navy warning. Transiting in the Strait of Hormuz is only possible with SEPA Navy permission and on designated routes. If any vessel attempts to transit in the strait without our permission or AIS off or outside of the designated route, it's responsible for any consequences of any danger. This is SEPA Navy out.
So that was the initial warning that was given, and then later on we got confirmation that Iran had struck one of these vessels. And Iran announced it. They announced that they struck this vessel to disable it because, again, it was violating the rules of the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran, of course, wants to assert its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. It believes that it has the right to essentially govern the strait along with Oman. Now, Oman is not capable of pushing back against the United States in the way that Iran is, evidently, so it is a lot more difficult for Oman to get its own way. That's why, despite the fact that there have been talks between both Tehran and Muscat, they, at the end of the day, and this is about establishing a joint mechanism to collect fees publicly, and when speaking to the United States, Oman is never going to push back that hard, despite the fact that it's been relatively on Iran's side throughout this conflict. With that being said, this article emerged today. Just going to pull this up here. Which is alarming to say the least, but expected for others. So the Telegraph put out an article citing its own sources, claiming that Trump may ask Iran for a new deal after the midterm elections. It says the White House insider says agreement was rushed to save Republican seats when Americans vote in November. And this in of itself, again, is a very bad sign. What's also a bad sign is we're seeing that the Americans are releasing assets. The Iranians, I believe they've sold about 10 billion worth of oil so far. They've also got their some of their frozen funds released to them. So they've made tens of billions out of this equation. But a lot of people have suspected that the Trump administration is simply trying to delay an outcome to this conflict and is trying to ease the economic burden on the global economy and, of course, on Americans as well, because he is coming up to the midterms. So this could be market manipulation. I think it's a little bit more than that. It's a bit deeper, and that's my personal opinion, than just the midterm elections. It does seem like there is disagreement in Washington about what to do here. Ultimately, the deal that's been put on the table is completely unacceptable to the Israel lobby. That's very clear. And they're not going to let us forget about that. And the Israel lobby evidently has bought the Trump administration. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The Trump administration is an Israel lobby administration. But that being said, there are those people who are what we could call the American deep state that aren't exactly happy with the position the United States has put itself in this conflict. And the Israelis are pushing hard to ensure that they get a return to war, but there's no real strategy. The strategy is for the United States, on behalf of Israel, to bomb Iranian civilian infrastructure, maybe do something symbolic in the Strait of Hormuz, which will mean absolutely nothing, or in the Persian Gulf, I should say, by capturing an island or trying to do so, wasting American soldiers' lives in order to do it. But ultimately, the Americans are going to gain absolutely nothing from this. Another piece of information that came out today, and this is about the Lebanon front, is that, and this is Yediot Aharonot reported, that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, succeeded in convincing Donald Trump not to proceed with an Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Of course, the Israelis are flatly refusing to withdraw from Lebanese territory. They will not even entertain it. And because they're not entertaining it, there can be no ceasefire in South Lebanon. And the Memorandum of Understanding, Clause 1, to end the war on all fronts is not being respected. So at this point, I mean, the Memorandum of Understanding has to be thrown into doubt. And the real question here is, the Trump administration is coming under pressure. Number one, internally inside of the United States, there are enough level-headed people that are not in as high positions in the chain of command, perhaps, but there are enough people that are going to push back and are going to want to look out for U.S. interests and don't want the economy to collapse, and will try to develop strategies to prevent the inevitable blowback and the inevitable consequences of this war. But on the other hand, you have this ultra-powerful lobby that is so incredibly aligned with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his vision to create the greater Israel and destroy Iran, because without the destruction of Iran, without destroying Iran as a state completely, we're not just talking about changing the regime there, we're talking about cutting it up into little pieces and it being in perpetual chaos for a long time. Without that outcome, without the destruction of the Iranian-led axis of resistance, Israel's Greater Israel project is dead. So they are going to fight tooth and nail to pressure the US to get what they want. And that is exactly what we're seeing here. And the question is, if the Israelis push back hard enough, does the Trump administration, even with some officials behind it, even with what we could call the American deep state behind it, can it push back sufficiently against the Israel lobby to the point where it will get them to withdraw from southern Lebanon? Because if the answer to that is no, then there will be no memorandum of understanding going forward and there will be no deal. That's just basically what it is. And of course, for those who are perhaps thinking about this, Iran understands that. Iran understands this very well, and they understand that this is all going in a direction of escalation. And talking about escalation, unfortunately, we have to talk about this because US President Donald Trump did say that he wants Syria's Abu Muhammad al-Julani or Ahmed al-Sharaa, whatever you want to call him. And some people get very defensive about what you call him. I personally don't care, but for the longest time, for people who were following the Syrian case, he was Abu Muhammad al-Julani, and even a lot of his followers still call him that. So this is a guy who was former head of Syria's Al-Qaeda wing. Now he's taken over. And surprise, surprise, the Al-Qaeda guy is best friends with the United States, visits Washington, he gets the sanctions lifted, and the US wants to use him to invade Syria. And so they're deploying. And these reinforcements, right, there's a mobilization of forces in a number of different areas now along the Syria-Lebanon border. And there's some we've heard in near Tartous, others near Qusayr, and then west of Damascus as well. What you'll notice about these deployments, by the way, these reinforcements, right? Obviously, we've got some near Tartous, but the vast majority of them are based around and are building up forces to potentially, if they're going to be used this way, and I'm not 100% that they will be used because it's going to be quite bad, as we'll get into in a second for them. It's not going to be very easy for them to do this, but the Israelis want to invade this territory here, the Bekaa Valley, right? So this is known as essentially the Hezbollah heartlands. And so they have most of their infrastructure, in this area. or at least that's what is believed. So for the Israelis to enter the Bekaa, this is a big task. I mean, they have barely got like 10 kilometers deep. Right now, like the biggest achievement was going from the border of occupied Palestine here, crossing this part of the Litani River, which again, not very far away from the border, and then capturing Beaufort Castle area, which Hezbollah didn't fight for. They withdrew from the area strategically. Now the Israelis, as this stream is ongoing, they're attempting once again to take this area, and the hope is to take the Aliyah Tahir Hills, so they have the high ground, right? They're struggling to do that, let alone succeeding in going deep into the Bekaa and taking out all of Hezbollah, because that's really the way that if you're going to deal a military blow to Hezbollah, you have to be here. So in order to do that, they want Syria's Al-Qaeda fighters, and that's in essence, that's what they are. They want them to invade the Bekaa Valley and try and attack Hezbollah. Now, the first thing I'll say about this is they probably won't get past the tribes that are in the Bekaa. The Lebanese army will resist. If they don't resist, as the new Syrian army, which again are a collection of, they'll have tribal forces supporting them, and there'll be a collection of the militant groups that were based in Idlib. So they're Al-Qaeda militant groups, right? This is not a formal professional army, but they will pose a threat. I mean, they do have their own arsenal of FPV drones, right? And they'll come over, and if they want to attack, I'm not going to say they're going to do no damage and they're not going to get over, but the Lebanese army, if it doesn't resist them, I think the country could be on the verge of a military coup, because I don't think the army is going to accept that. The army leadership accept the Syrian forces crossing over. And Hezbollah, of course, would join, and I think that it would be a disaster for the Syrian forces. And if they do that as well, the Iraqis have threatened very explicitly, and we're talking about here with the PMU, they can amass hundreds of thousands of fighters. The Syrians have, I don't know, about 40,000 that are worth anything. Maybe they can amass some tribes again, but people who are not all that experienced. And, you know, maybe they're just going to throw all those foreign fighters at this project. Maybe that's what it is, because Jolani, or Ahmed al-Sharaa, he has a problem right now because, of course, the Syrian opposition at the time, now the government, used foreign fighters from around the world to fight against what was then the Syrian government. And then at the end, they were like, oh, no, we're not going to give you Syrian citizenship. Yeah. And, you know, there's even pressure from the US, like, get them out of the country. And they're like, yeah, cool. And they've done some assassinations against these people. They've arrested a bunch of people advocating for these foreign fighters. And, you know, the way that you keep these people happy, these fighters happy, is you send them into areas where they can attack like minority communities, or in this case, you send them over the border into Lebanon so they can go and kill Shia, right? Because these are people with like a Salafi ideology where they believe that, you know, their biggest enemy is Iran, and their biggest enemy is the Shia. Not all of these people in Syria, I'm painting them with one brush, but if you're going to use the most extreme people, that's what they believe. So throw them in there, and then it's going to be a civilian bloodbath. That's just what's going to happen. And sectarian tensions are going to explode across the region if this happens. This will be a catastrophe. There's nothing good that comes out of this, because this will be a catastrophe. And if you don't think that sectarian tensions are going to rise from this, oh, it's going to be insane. Because what do you think those the Shia in the Bekaa, when these Al-Qaeda linked forces with the patches of Daesh on their shoulders are coming in, and if they reach areas, civilian areas, what they'll do to those people, then they're going to have their own sectarian reactions. That's just going to happen. It's inevitable. So if the Trump administration succeeds in using the Syrian forces in order to invade Lebanon, it's going to be terrible. And also, if the Iraqis get involved, which they are threatening to do, then it's going to be a bloodbath. And I wouldn't rule out that even Iran might launch some missiles on Damascus at that point, just to get rid of this and just completely topple this this government. It could even happen. Now, what I'm saying again is my opinion, but it will just be a mess. It will be a complete mess, and it's a mess, of course, that the Israelis will love to see, right? Because as of now, the situation, obviously, it's not great, but sectarian tensions in terms of in the region are not at their height, not as bad as they could be. But the Israelis, they want sectarian tensions. Again, this is part of that whole Greater Israel project, and they want this entire region. You know, they want to cut up Lebanon here, little Lebanon, into all these different warring states. The same in Syria, ultimately. They want to have a Druze rump state here. If they could have got their way, they would have had some sort of statelet with the Kurds. And that's not off the table still, by the way, because things aren't exactly going great inside of Syria. So it could go in any direction. So I would not say that that's ruled out yet. I would not say that that's ruled out yet. And the Israelis are looking to do that. So that's part of their agenda here. And that's something that we should keep in mind. However, there's, in other news, there's a different series of forces that are also mobilizing, and as the Israeli media calls them, the Houthis, but that's, of course, not what they're called. They're called Ansarallah, and the Yemeni armed forces, which now is making it into the Israeli media, they're taking note of it, have started to mobilize. So they've had like a general mobilization, and they're talking about breaking the siege. And so this has, of course, frightened the Israelis. The Israeli media have been talking about this quite a bit. Western media, not as much, but the Israeli media, they've certainly been talking about this. And for good reason. If Ansarallah, we'll just take a look at a map here. If Ansarallah are to do an offensive, and they might try to take Aden. So Aden is, when they take Aden, this city here, right? It's they've united Yemen, essentially. Because if you look at Yemen, most of Yemen is like you see over here, like Al-Mahra and Hadramaut, and there's people there, but it's not. The majority of the country, its population is, you know, centered here in what's known as North Yemen historically, and around Aden as well, right? These are like the population centers. If they do an offensive and they take this, there's a good chance that what's going to happen is Saudi Arabia, which is backing the opposition, right? The Yemeni opposition, or what is called at the United Nations the internationally recognized government of Yemen, which I'm going to break down just for a second here. So when you hear internationally recognized government of Yemen, so there is actually no real president anymore, but somebody that even has that title anymore. It's a government that was formed in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. That's what that is. Right now, it does have people who support it for sure, but it is a Saudi-backed government of Yemen, which is based in Aden now. And before, by the way, it didn't have complete control. It was the STC, the Sovereign Transitional Council, and that was backed by the Emiratis. And so the Emiratis got a little bit, you know, too into their own heads, you know, a few months back, and decided that they'd go for an offensive and try and kick the Saudis out. That didn't go too well. And so the UAE got pushed completely out its role, you know, at least formally, inside of Yemen. And because of that conflict that just happened between the UAE-backed forces and the Saudi-backed forces, there's probably a lot of people that feel pretty angry at the result. And also the management of Aden and those areas in the south of Yemen has been abysmal and has caused a lot of protests and riots at different points as well. It's not like they're taking care of them, right? They're not exactly taking care of their population in the south. Not to say that everything's rosy in the north, but at the same time, there is a government that is formed in Sana'a, which is the capital of Yemen, the capital city, and was before 2015, where the government is, the presidential, all of this, all the government buildings. Ansarallah, when it took over, 2/3 of the military, the Yemeni military, sided with it. So it had the majority of the country's armed forces on its side. It has the majority of the country's population living within the territory that it controls. It is, for all intents and purposes, the actual Yemeni government. The only thing here is, when you internationally recognize, is all these countries at the United Nations, right, and are supporting the Saudi-backed puppets. Right? That's what it is. That's just the truth of the matter, right? And there's no way to sugarcoat it. You know, they are the internationally recognized government. That's true, but again, it's not real. It's not organic. It's foreign backed, and so if Ansarallah are going to advance, and this mobilization of its men is very serious that we're seeing, I believe maybe this is the opportune moment for Ansarallah to do this, because Saudi Arabia, because of the current crisis, and right now, by the way, that shipping through the Strait of Hormuz temporarily closed after Iran just struck that tanker, right? So it's uncertain. It's uncertain, the situation, the predicament of the Strait of Hormuz. And so Riyadh, what they've been doing is they've been piping it out, right? They're selling their oil still, and they've been able to trade using the Red Sea. Now, if they back the Yemeni internationally recognized government, if they back them in this conflict and they refuse to lift the blockade on Yemen, and they refuse to do a deal with the Yemeni government in Sana'a, then they will probably lock down the Red Sea to them as well, and they can hit targets deep within Saudi Arabia, and it will do a lot of economic damage. This is perhaps the opportune moment for them to do this. That's why I believe it's possible for them to do it. Now, I don't have any special information, from sources to tell you this will or won't happen. However, just looking at this, I think this is the perfect time if they were going to do an offensive like this, and this would unite Yemen. This would be the unification of Yemen if that happened. Maybe they can strike some deals along the way when the offensive starts, or pretty close to it, and they could close this situation. By the way, an independent Yemen with no blockade on it, and this is like, the only Arab state which is going to support Palestine. The only Arab state which has the guts to do basically what Iran has been doing, but directly intervening. And today, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, who is the leader of Ansarallah, gave a speech and said that they're not only going to start responding to Israel if it escalates its bombardment of Gaza, but also maybe what they're going to start to do is to target Israeli forces that are being deployed into Somaliland, right? Which is, of course, only recognized by them. And they've reached out to a number of countries to impose conditions that will restrict the flow through Bab el-Mandab to the Israelis, to punish them in terms of trade. And this has been causing a lot of anxiety. So the Council on Foreign Relations, a New York and Washington-based think tank, has been getting quite anxious about this. So they're saying another Hormuz, the Red Sea's threat to the global economy. And realistically speaking here, it is actually a big threat, because right now, it wouldn't have been if the Israelis would have stopped their genocide, because initially when Ansarallah locked down the Red Sea, it did it just for Israeli shipping. Then the United States, along with their European allies, and I believe it was Bahrain as well from the Gulf, which is negligible, I don't know. They just put their name on a sheet of paper to say they were part of it, and it doesn't mean anything. But their European allies, the United States, did what was it? Operation Prosperity Guardian, right? That was Biden's first operation, and then what was the operation that Trump launched? Anyway, they couldn't open the Red Sea. They got blasted a whole bunch of time. They wasted tens of billions in US taxpayer dollars, all to try and support Israel. And what happened is Yemen just locked down the Red Sea for all shipping to do with any of those countries that got involved in bombing them. Instead of those countries going to Israel and going, hey, stop your genocide, guys, just kill a few less kids and do a deal to do a prisoner exchange. Couldn't do that. The first thing they had to try before doing that for 1.5 years is to impose some massive naval operation on the Yemeni. And you're not going to do anything, because if you know anything about the Yemeni people, is they don't take well to threats. They really don't. And if there's a missile to fire for any reason whatsoever at Israel, that missile is going to be fired. So they are anxious about this, and they should be, because even if, by the way, those insurance premiums on those ships going through, because of the restrictions imposed on Israel, actually go up. So it does actually have some impact. Now, it's not the same as shutting down everything, because if they do that, then it's 10 times worse in terms of the impact that's going to have on the global economy. And just to sort of show this here, so if we go back, so everything that's coming in through Bab el-Mandab and going through the Red Sea, right, and it will transit through the Suez Canal here in Egypt, all of that trade, if that's stopped, if that's blocked by Yemen's Ansarallah, which they've demonstrated they can do, Donald Trump launched a 1.5-month long campaign bombing Yemen with the B-2s and everything, didn't do a thing. Then the alternative is those ships have to go all the way around Africa. They probably have to dock in South Africa. They have to go all the way around in order to reach Europe, which is obviously costly, very costly. So that is a serious problem that they're going to face, a very serious problem that they're going to face. And then we have a number of different things. Before we get into the other front, which I wanted to talk some bit about and look at the latest footage from on the ground inside of South Lebanon, we're just going to pull up these videos here to look at what's going on. But before that, just to remind everyone, this show, the Target Stream, is 100% viewer funded, and we've been heavily financially targeted and banned from PayPal. Our fundraiser is even taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They withheld our funds. And so we're looking for 300 new members to keep this show alive. So if you do like what you are seeing here, if you like the show, if you tune in and you feel as if you can contribute, you can come and become a member and help keep this show alive, then please do. So that is right there before we get into the videos of what's been happening. So because there has been a 5-day period during which Hezbollah has actually ceased fire until now, when Israeli soldiers are now getting evacuated, there's been more medevac helicopters transporting the dead and injured soldiers out because Israel decided that it was going to advance, just completely violent. Because it did that, obviously now Hezbollah is going to fight again. But that being said, there still are some videos because that have been released of FPV drone and also missile attacks. So we're going to get into some of them here, right here. The first one, take that volume off here. So this is a FPV drone operation that was released, I believe, 2 days ago by Hezbollah, and they're directly targeting Israeli soldiers. You see them fleeing the scene here with an anti-personnel munition. Of course, they don't directly hit them in this clip. That's not a direct hit. So, and we don't have, obviously, confirmation. But they released this, Hezbollah, and there is also an image that they released as well afterwards. Let's take this down here. They released this image here as well, which is again from an FPV drone, which was in response to the Israeli senior leadership, the defense minister Israel Katz and Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that we will not flee from Lebanon and we will not leave Lebanese territory. And so Hezbollah started releasing this footage to show them literally fleeing and running away, right? That they're cowering and running around the clock. In addition to some other clips that we've got. So this is a D9 bulldozer that was struck, targeted again with a FPV, first-person view drone operated by Hezbollah. And this is the Beaufort Castle area. Again, the Israelis, they're claiming to have, full operational control in these areas, and they're just getting picked off by Hezbollah, by their drones. By the way, everything you're seeing here, this is the D9, and everything you're seeing here is, all of it has been released since our last stream on Monday. So everything is brand new. Again, a direct hit here. So this is one of the latest videos that was released by Hezbollah of them targeting. And this is around the clock, right, that they're running these operations. Interestingly enough, we haven't seen the footage released yet of the targeting of an Israeli tank was carrying a commander, which was taken out last week. So we're still waiting on some of this footage, which we know exists because apparently there are a lot of these FPV drones used during these attacks. So we're still waiting on that footage to emerge. Here's a attack which was launched. And again, you're seeing that, this footage came out on the 12th. So there's a little bit of delay in terms of how long it takes for this footage to be published, evidently for security reasons. So again, Beaufort Castle area, and this is a hit on a Merkava tank. And Hezbollah and this has actually appeared in the Hebrew media recently, is Hezbollah has been innovative with the warheads that it's actually attaching to its FPV drones, because before the rounds that it was using were not as effective at penetrating the armor of the likes of tanks. Now, what the Israelis are noting is that when Hezbollah seeks to target a Merkava tank, they are using the appropriate warheads in order to penetrate the armor and get through. Because Hezbollah has a lot of weapons, right, that can, inflict a tank kill hit. And they have more training, more background when it comes to firing using the Almas or Cornet anti-tank guided missiles. Like, those teams are very professional. They've been trained for a very long time. And so the FPV drone warfare is something relatively new that they've adapted, and they are innovating so that they can do more damage. That's something that you see, by the way, in the Gaza Strip, because over the years, the more and more that Qassam brigades of Hamas or Suraya al-Quds of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades and others that were fighting the Israelis, the more they engaged, the more they learned, right? The more they learn about how to damage and take out these tanks. And that's why they developed certain weapons, right, en masse, like the Yasin 105 RPG, which obviously it has a tandem warhead on it. And the whole purpose of that is, to break through first. It's so that it penetrates the armor properly. And the Israeli tanks as well often are, or they were. We don't see this very active anymore because it seems like it's all been wasted. But they had what was known as the trophy system, which could sort of activate and fire off a round in order to detonate a warhead outside of the range of the tank. But that being said, even when you're watching these operations here against the tanks that are carried out with these FPV drones, even if they hit them, on the tracks, and even if they just make this tank immobile, then this is something that is a victory for them, because logistically it's a nightmare for the Israelis. All these tanks, having to drag them out of the battlefield, having to replace them, having to repair them. It's costly, it takes time, and it keeps them on their feet and keeps them thinking. I mean, this is the whole purpose of these asymmetric warfare tactics, is again, keep your enemy moving, keep him guessing, make it a logistical and economic nightmare, and make the enemy bleed until the point where it's just not worth it anymore. And that is what we see Hezbollah doing. That being said, there was more footage. Let's pull this up here, that Hezbollah released. And again, as our disclaimer that we do every single episode, this is not an endorsement. This is for educational purposes. But Hezbollah released this footage, which is a number of videos showing the launch of what they call advanced missiles. So they have a series of different missiles that they use against Israelis. And they're using them, by the way. This is, I think, Majd al-Zoun in South Lebanon. So they're using, and here, again, like in South Lebanon, they're using them. So they're firing on Israeli troop gatherings and positions with missiles, like not just rockets, because obviously they use rockets like rocket artillery, and they're firing, but they're using missiles to target with larger warheads that are more precise, to target Israeli soldier gatherings, to target buildings where the Israelis are holed up, where they're located, and to punish them, right? You see here again, and this indicates, because they're using these missiles to strike Israeli soldiers and soldier gatherings, it indicates that they have these in abundance, because they're using them, quite frequently, these kinds of missiles to target the Israelis. And we rarely ever hear the Israelis follow up with reports on what these missiles, that's a cruise missile there. So this is much more advanced. So we never hear the Israelis admit to what these missiles are doing. And again, like they have to admit to some of the operations that are conducted by Hezbollah, because they're on film, they're captured on film. But even now, like was just reported before this stream started, so I said at the start, the Israelis, they said that there were 4, the media anyway, leaked that there were 4 Israeli soldier casualties. 4. But we had 4 different medevac helicopter missions. You have 1 helicopter for each soldier. I mean, you can make your own mind up about that. We've covered it multiple times on this show, the evidence that they are covering up their casualties, that they don't release casualty reports for incidents which are documented, which we have on film, and there are just so many of them. But that being said, there's another development, and that has been that the Israelis, who recently lost when they were trying to take the exact area, which now we'll zoom into this area here. So the Israelis, they're trying to advance onto the Ali Tahir Hills. Go over here towards Nabatea. Okay, so right now they're advancing around here, okay? And they're trying to capture the Aliya Tahir Hills area, right? That's where they want to capture. And as a result of this attempt to advance last week, or just over a week ago now, they fell into a well-prepared Hezbollah ambush. And as a result of it, the tank was completely detonated. Like, they destroyed the tank completely. And there's some footage that emerged that was filmed, for example, from locals. Hezbollah were firing rockets after they destroyed this tank, 11 waves, which prevented evacuation teams from reaching the site. And according to the estimates, the Israelis estimated that the 4 soldiers that they admitted were killed had been incinerated, that they had been blown into little pieces and burned beyond the point of being recognized. That's what the conclusion was that was drawn. And here is some footage of different vehicles burning, or photographs of different vehicles burning that was taken from civilians in near villages who were watching this all emerge from a distance. So the Israelis, anyway, it was a huge catastrophe for them, right? And so they lost this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Dor Simon, or Simhon, however the Israelis pronounce it in Hebrew. Here's footage of him preparing his soldiers as a commander, preparing them to go into South Lebanon. And of course, the Israelis want you to feel bad for this psychotic murderer who was also, of course, deployed in Gaza and part of the exact same brigade and battalion that was responsible or implicated in the murder of Hind Rajab in the Gaza Strip. But that being said, the interesting development that has come out of that is that now the Israelis started admitting something. Number one, that they couldn't reach those soldiers that were inside that tank because it was too dangerous for them to do so. And they even wanted to establish a mechanism so that they could coordinate so Hezbollah did not attack them while they extracted the bodies. And they were nervous that Hezbollah would seize the bodies, right? And now they've been, talking, and there's a lot of fear and concern, right, that they're going to start trying to capture the bodies of the Israeli soldiers, and then in general they're going to try and abduct Israeli soldiers, take captive. So the Israelis, they say that they've in the field, they've instructed their soldiers to move in pairs or groups of 3 at all times because of the possibility that Hezbollah's elite Redwan forces will attempt to ambush them, will attempt to take them captive. And amidst that, the interesting thing is they started admitting in the Israeli media and talking about that there were more casualties, and then that triggered some questions. Because if there were more casualties, which it appeared as if there were, and there's those who have been killed that weren't announced, they could have been foreigners. And that is something that started getting discussed, is that these might be private military contractors. And see, this is not actually a far-fetched idea at all, because the Israelis, they're not only using private military contractors in their wars, they're using their own private security firms, their own private civilian demolition companies to come in and to destroy homes in both Gaza. And there's been copious amounts of information that these private contractors are paid danger money to go into Gaza. This was an earlier article that was written about it, but just to demonstrate, have this here for the point. They brought in and they created this whole industry of demolition and bringing in people and employing Israelis on danger money to destroy civilian homes. They did the same in Lebanon. And they bring a lot of foreigners as well in. They use people, like, for instance, they've recruited the Israeli military. One of the first people, I think, is the first or the second Israeli soldier who was killed by Hezbollah when the latest round of the war on March 2nd began. The first or the second, I can't remember, Israeli soldier killed was a Syrian Druze who had joined up recently because of the sectarian violence inside of Syria, right? Because the Israelis have thrown their weight behind their own sectarian separatist militias inside of Syria, Druze militias. And as a result, Druze want to come in now and get Israeli passports, and there are those of them who've decided that they are going to join the military. So they like to use others. They like to put them on the front line. And the question is, are these private military contractors? They did use them in Gaza. There's copious amounts of evidence. But also it was proposed that the Israeli soldiers themselves operating in the south of Lebanon be replaced. Apparently, American diplomats proposed replacing Israeli forces in southern Lebanon with private military contractors. Obviously, they say it's an idea that was quickly rejected, but how do we know they are not in there right now? And they're not operating. And that explains why there are reports that come out of casualties and people being evacuated, and then we never hear anything about them, and deaths even, and then we never hear any follow-up on their identities. And that turned out to be the case in the Gaza Strip, that they were openly then, later on last year, openly employing private contractors. Not only did they do this for the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which of course was a death trap and was just a way to make money, but what they also did in Gaza after the implementation of the ceasefire is they began putting private military contractors, or proposing putting private military contractors at checkpoints. And the same firms that were involved in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have been getting proposals come through and proposing a new role for them inside of Gaza in this new phase, which is supposed to be a ceasefire phase. So obviously, before the so-called ceasefire was implemented, this was something that these companies were used, right? They had like Safe Reach Solutions and UG Solutions, which were the two big firms in the based out of the United States. And then when the ceasefire came into effect, they were proposing that they'd hand over control to them. Also, another thing to think about here is, if they're using these private military contractors, they're accountable to absolutely nobody. We don't know what their role is. We don't know how long that they have been involved. In Gaza, there have been reports, and the Qassam brigades as well accused them of using private military contractors. And what they did is the Israelis started recruiting like these Christian evangelical types to come in and to serve with the Israeli military. And then if these guys, throw them into the meat grinder because they're useless, to the Israelis anyway, they don't mean anything. Like, these are just brainwashed morons. Throw them into the meat grinder. If they die, you don't have to report their deaths. So there would even be videos that would come out from Gaza as well, where the Qassam brigades would evidently take someone out with a sniper shot, or it's a tank kill hit, right? They fire an RPG, and we see it on video, and there's no casualty reports. But the Israeli media around that time were talking about a security incident in some of these cases, but then nothing. We don't hear anything, no follow-up on it. So the question is, are they using private military contractors in order to support their regular forces. That would be quite the development if that is the case, and that's something that has to be looked into. And not many people are posing that question. We see it in the Arabic media. We actually see it a bit in the Hebrew media as well, posing these sort of questions. We don't hear this from the English-speaking press. This is just not something that we're hearing about. And of course, there's a lot that we don't hear them mention, right? At the current moment in the Gaza Strip, for example, Israel has killed way over 1,000 Palestinians since the so-called ceasefire was implemented. And there has been a new wave of talks. And the Israelis want for Hamas to hand over even personal weapons, right? And give them maps of the tunnels, which are not going to happen. They're putting unrealistic expectations out, or unrealistic demands that they know the Palestinians will never accept and have not accepted in the past, and was not part of the ceasefire agreement at all in order to collapse it, right? But here is where they sort of get you with the twist. Gaza's high representative, right? This is an Al Jazeera article, by the way. But, and of course, in the title, they don't, like the subheading, they can't always clarify what they mean. But we hear a lot of talk now when they're talking about Gaza. Well, the Gaza's high representative. So who is Gaza's so-called high representative? Well, that would be this guy here, right? This UAE stooge, right? Who, since August 2021, has served as a distinguished visiting fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. This guy here is you would think, when we hear a description like Gaza's high representative, that it would be some Palestinian, right? Maybe somebody, the head of a, no. This guy who's friends with Netanyahu, right? who has good relations with Netanyahu. And they'll go, oh, but he had really good relations with the Palestinians as well. And by that, they mean Mahmoud Abbas, right, of the Palestinian Authority based in Ramallah, which is essentially a subcontractor for the Israeli occupation. So that's what they mean, right? Like, it's just ridiculous, right? This is not somebody in favor. But that's the guy that's in head of the Gaza, the Board of Peace, Gaza representative in the Board of Peace, right? In the nonsense ceasefire we have. The purpose of me bringing all of this up, by the way, is that there's recently been talks, a phone call that took place between Abbas Araghchi and Bassem Naim of Hamas, an official in Hamas's political bureau. And this was centered around the fact that Gaza is being included in the negotiations between Iran and Washington, that the Gaza front will be included as part of a ceasefire across all of the fronts. The reason why this is important to focus on here is because if Iran will have to include Gaza, because this war began because of Gaza. There would be no operation to assassinate Khamenei, no operation to assassinate Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah. There would have been no attacks on all of these other countries if it wasn't for this first. Because what happened on October 7 enabled the Israelis, in their mind, they believed that they had to expedite the process of achieving their long-term goals. They had to use this as an opportunity now, once and for all, to, number one, deal with the Gaza question, right? So exterminate the Palestinians and expel the rest of them from Gaza, at the very least, and then finish off the West Bank, because the West Bank, is not resisting in the same way. And then you go to the next level, you take out Hezbollah, you take out the Syrian government, because that's allied with Hezbollah and with the Iranians. And you focus on then pressuring the Iraqi government to, deal with the Iraqi groups. And at that point, anyway, they're not as relevant. And then you focus some might on going after maybe Yemen. But the number one thing to take out all of these different fronts is to go after Iran, because Iran is the head of the snake. And if you don't take out Iran, then you can't defeat Hamas properly. You can't defeat Hezbollah. The Syrian government was a different question because it's an ally, but it wasn't, actually fighting Israel. It's not the same. But in terms of the allies that Iran has in the region, they're all armed groups. They're not governments of countries, right? With the exception of the Ansarallah government in Yemen, right? But still, they're not officially recognized, right, by the so-called international community, which, the international community has about as much meaning as, I don't know, anything does at this point. It's just ridiculous and stupid. And international law and the international community and the United Nations have proven to be completely and totally useless, unfortunately. And the reason why is because it's a place where everyone meets to talk about things, to feel good, and talk about laws that aren't implemented because all of the governments are corrupt and they'd rather take a paycheck from a lobbyist rather than do their job and take care of their own citizens and stop a genocide from happening, because that is who these people are. There is no difference now, despite the fact that we have a UN, between the UN and the League of Nations. But anyway, I digress. Talking about this, the whole entire reason why we are where we are is because Israel saw after October 7 that the head of the snake was Iran. Eventually, you have to get to Iran. And so they did everything they did, attacking more than 8 different countries last year that they attacked, right? Attacking all of these different countries across the region, killing all of these people, assassinations left, right, and center, genocide, ethnic cleansing, all of it, stealing Syrian land, stealing Lebanese land, stealing, obviously, Palestinian land, more of it, and then threatening to even steal Jordanian land and to steal Egyptian territory, right? And then even talking about the head of the Israeli opposition, the moderate, Yair Lapid, talking about taking Iraqi territory. Okay? All of this started from the Gaza Strip because Israel lost its mind. And this is something as well which, if the Iranians now were to believe, and I don't think they do, but if they were to believe that they can close this conflict without Gaza, that this would be the biggest and a historic mistake of proportions that we will feel the aftermath of for decades, if they truly believe that. Because what's going to happen is, if Gaza is not included in this, Israel will use Gaza as a punching bag. And the only one that's going to jump in to help it at that point is probably Yemen, right? That's what would happen if it wasn't part of a deal, if it wasn't part of an overall deal. If Iran was not to include it, not only would they go all out on Gaza and become psychotic in the way that they behave, right? It would give them the upper hand. It would also cause a lot of division within the region, within the axis of resistance, and a lot of lack of faith from some partners. And then they would end up going after Iran again anyway. And we would be in the same cycle. Or if the Israelis keep applying pressure, even if they don't do a massive operation to do something dramatic themselves in Gaza, what will happen is the situation right now is getting so bad in the Gaza Strip, where Israel is blocking basic aid. There's like plagues of mosquitoes and bugs and diseases and all sorts. The Israelis don't allow construction material to get in, basic material, sanitary material. The hospitals don't function, nothing. They live in broken tents because most of them can't get new tents. In the midst of the rubble and the sand and all of the diseases and the bugs and all of this, they're sitting there right now as Israel escalates the bombing campaign, as Israel tries to take more territory inside of Gaza and expand its yellow line and use its Daesh-linked proxies. So these ISIS-linked thugs, murderers and criminals that Israel co-opted into 5 different gangs which it backed it arms them, trains them, coordinates with them, gives them air support. These guys are coming into areas in the Gaza Strip where these people are living in tents and going towards hospitals and trying to kidnap women and children. Yeah, ISIS-backed thugs and criminals who Israel bombed the prisons at the start of the war to let these people, some of them on death row, right? Drug traffickers, murderers, rapists, you name it, who were set to be executed, and then gave them weapons, got them to loot aid trucks, right? That's how they made their money, by looting aid trucks and then drip feeding that aid onto the black market to make a massive profit while the Israeli drones watch overhead. And these Salafists, these extremist Takfiri vermin that the Israelis back, and apparently the UAE back as well, by the way, in Gaza, go and try to kidnap women and children. And the Israelis are escalating their airstrikes now on Gaza, restricting more of the goods that are coming in. And publicly, their officials go out and they brag about the fact that they want to try and force them eventually to out of Gaza, to ethnically cleanse them. That's the long-term plan by keeping them here in this position. So what do you think will happen if an agreement is struck and the war shuts down in Lebanon and it shuts down in Iran, okay? And Gaza is not included. What do you think rationally will happen? Well, the Palestinian resistance groups will know that they have one more shot to try and do anything about this, and they will launch an offensive. They will have to at some point. That's what will happen inevitably. I'm not saying it will happen soon, but eventually it will happen. That would be the consequence. That, or the Israelis will go all in anyway. And then we're back to full-scale genocide. And so those are the consequences. And as a result, that will again spin out of control, and Israel will be back doing what it wanted to do in the first place anyway, and going after Iran. So this is the thing. If you don't close the front, if you don't close all the fronts, that is why. Because obviously it's a moral imperative, right, to do this. At the heart of the entire idea of the axis of resistance is Palestine. Without that central pillar to everything, then the whole idea of the resistance is not there, right? The resistance has betrayed its cause. So there's the moral obligation, but strategically as well. So when people are saying that Iran will not include Gaza, they cannot afford not to include Gaza. If they don't include Gaza, forget about it. This would be a historic mistake if that happened, and that's why they won't. That's why they will have to include Gaza. One, it's a moral imperative. And number two, depending upon which one you believe here is the most important, the moral imperative is important. Because if you don't follow that, if you violate the Palestinian cause when you're a resistance organization in the region, you don't have any legitimacy. So you need that legitimacy. The Palestinian cause is the legitimacy, right, for all of the resistance in the region. And that's just the way it is, right? So even if you're looking at it in the way that you don't like Iran, you have to acknowledge the moral reason, and then strategically as well. It doesn't make any sense. That is why, for people who come and say that Iran will not include Gaza, obviously, again, to pull this up, there are talks that are happening. Iran cannot afford not to include Gaza. And that would be a historic mistake if they didn't. And this is something, I want to just pull this up here, because this is a clip which, again, most people don't follow these think tanks in DC, like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is where, our High Commissioner of Gaza, right, is a senior fellow. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy is, of course, a Zionist think tank, which is, in essence, an extension of the Israel lobby that helped influence the U.S. government's opinion when it came to invading Iraq, for instance, and influencing a lot of what they did. They have people, that work for them, like Donna Stroul, and these people that like dip in and out of actual positions of power and have influence and pull in positions in Washington. And they advocate for like these just sadistic policies of like sanctions and, going after this country and bombing the other and all of the rest of it. Like that's what these think tanks do. And they shape US policy. And they had this conference that they held. And within this conference, an Israeli ex-official, Michael Herzog, who is the Israeli ambassador to Washington before, spoke. And I want everyone to listen to what he said, because I think it's very telling. And I think, and I believe, I'll give a bit of analysis after we listen to him, but I believe that Iran and Hezbollah, there was a point where things clicked for them about what had to happen. And not just Iran and Hezbollah, but all of the elements of Iran's axis of resistance.
We soon understood after October 7th that we are challenged not only by Hamas, but by the whole Iranian axis. And even though it wasn't coordinated with them tactically, they joined. And they were gradually drawn in until we found ourselves confronting Hezbollah, Iran, and the rest of the axis. And
just stop it right there. Of course, like, that's a lie, because Hezbollah did put up a support front. That's true. But Israel attacked the Iranians multiple times. They assassinated top IRGC officials, and then they bombed the consular segment of Iran's embassy in Damascus, which triggered Iran to fire on the Israelis. But yeah, just there for context. Of course, he can't put any grain of, like, he has to sprinkle some grain of truth, but to get to his point, he has to, of course, saturate it with nonsense and propaganda.
And, we understood that we cannot finish that war without dealing with Iran and the Iranian axis. We cannot just finish the war by defeating Hamas. So after we basically degraded Hezbollah, deterred Iran, took action against the whole axis, even the Houthis, and after Syria collapsed, Israel fixed its gaze on Iran itself, the big prize, what's called the head of the snake. And in fact, the specific planning for the current campaign was started in November, after the last round with Iran and after Hezbollah was hit hard. And it was a new type of plan. It was a new concept, no longer pinpointed strikes on nuclear sites. It was a much broader, bigger campaign against the Iranian system to weaken it, so that it'll be much more difficult for the system itself to reconstruct its strategic capabilities. Iran, I believe, misread Israel totally. Like Nasrallah, they failed to understand that post-October 7th, Israel is a totally different country.
So what we should take away from that is them admitting, and his analysis there is that Iran and the former Secretary General of Hezbollah misread the Israelis in terms of their intentions. Now, I don't know that element about Hezbollah and exactly whether it was Hezbollah or Iran, but the reality is that the broader axis of resistance, and at the time, I'd interviewed officials with different organizations, and the sense I got from these people was that they believed that a ceasefire was possible at that point without things going to a broader war. After the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, all of these groups, right, when I went back to interview people from different groups and officials, when I went back and I interviewed people and I had these conversations, then suddenly the talk was all about the final war. It was talk about, how to sort of preempt what was coming next. And the tone and the seriousness with which they took those statements was very telling, to say the least. In essence, the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who for all intents and purposes was the leader really of the broader axis of resistance. When Israel went after and assassinated him, and they did so in the most brutal fashion possible, they dropped so many explosives that they took down a city block and they killed around 300 people. which they openly said at the time they estimated that was how many would die. And then talking about international law, Biden openly celebrated it, right? Okay. They can just do something like that. There was no condemnation in the United Nations of, well, some people did condemn, but, this Secretary General, who can't even say that the UN Charter was violated when the US and Israel attacked Iran. Anyway, without focusing on that, when that happened, something changed. And I think the message was clear that everyone knew that they're going for Iran. They're going all the way. They want to do regime change in Iran, and they're very serious about this, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want. And so at the start of this year, the Israelis attempted to hatch a plot inside of Iranian territory where they believed that, well, we can get like a color revolution going, and then we can, get these armed groups to kill all of these police officers and, storm IRGC strongholds and all of this. And do you know what happened? The IRGC had dealt with this a number of times before, but have dealt with cases where it wasn't so explicit. Like there were some real, genuine demands amongst people who were actually pissed off, like people who were protesting because of basic things, price of energy, whatever, gas, basic things. This time it started off as a currency protest, but those people went home pretty soon after these psychotic people started coming out and trying to kill everyone, right? But because of the way they did it, it got put down so quickly, so violently, that there was just no chance that this was going to succeed because it wasn't organic, right? There was no organic element to it. Like if you see in the past cases where there is foreign influence, like where you had the freedom, woman, life, whatever, brought to you by Saudi Arabia, Iran International at that time, which took funds from Saudi Arabia back then, not anymore, but it did at that time, was promoting woman, life, freedom, which I thought was quite funny. But that in of itself, even though there was foreign influence in Iran, of course, they're going to latch on to anything they can. There were genuine, demands and a lot of genuine people in those protests. And it was something that actually created change inside of the country. And the Iranian government responded to it. This time, I think it was very explicit from the start what they were trying to do. That failed. Then they're just okay, let's just get the United States and let's just go militarily. And they tried everything. They did their decapitation strikes and they failed. So now they're in a very, very tough position because they believe, you hear Michael Herzog there. That's another reason I played that clip, right? And he's speaking, these the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and their panels, they get a few hundred views on these panels, right? Maximum, some of them get 1,000 or 2, right? Not many people are watching them, but they have important people for their purposes watching them. But something that he said there, which is important, is the Israeli concept. We dealt a blow to Hezbollah. The Syrians collapsed. That mindset that the Israelis were in was one of victory, victory, victory. We won, and they're encouraged to do more and more and more. Now they're freaking out because Iran has not collapsed. Hezbollah came back. They realized they didn't defeat Hezbollah. They couldn't defeat them. They lost, and they're losing. And now, because of that desperation, we may see some dramatic steps taken. And that's something to look out for. And that's why, again, circling back to the Gaza issue, if Gaza was not to be included in this deal, we're just heading right down the road for more conflict. That's just a reality. And I think anyone serious knows this. Anyone serious knows this because Israel will simply single them out. And right now they do that. When Israel had to cease fire by just reducing the bombings and killings that it was doing in Lebanon for 5 days, so it would still kill people and bomb Lebanon and put drones over Beirut and all of that, right? Still fire white phosphorus and all of that occasionally. But it had to de-escalate in Lebanon. It went straight to going and killing people in packed areas in the Gaza Strip. It went to burning the remaining, the slither of land that exists in Gaza still, where there's agricultural land, burning it. Because they have to take out their anger somewhere. They just always have to be killing people. And unless you force that entity into a deal, you force them into diplomacy, you force the closure of the Gaza front, this keeps going and we're around in circles and we're back to square one. That's the reality. So when people, and I think that's a point that's very important to take note of, and that's why I am addressing it in this way and with such seriousness, because a lot of people asked, a lot of people were demanding answers on that. Okay, why are we not hearing more about Gaza? They are, of course, speaking with Hamas officials about this, about Gaza. And the situation in Gaza is horrific. It's terrible. And for the most part, we're ignoring it. And this is actually a clip while we're talking about the situation that came out. There was a United Nations report that was released by an independent commission of inquiry. And here are some findings that they made.
I must share with all of you that apart from the sources that we've quoted in the report, we also conducted oral hearings after we arrived here in Geneva this time. And 3 of the doctors who were involved in treatment of children in Gaza spoke to us. And they confirmed what the report has found on the basis of available material, that the gunshot wounds were specifically directed at the head and the neck to cause maximum damage. In one instance, a breastfeeding baby was shot by a quadcopter through the head, and the baby now suffers a permanent paralysis. So there have been all these instances quoted in the report of specific targeting of children. Quadcopters, as all of you are aware, has thermal imagery. It has infrared heat cameras which can tell you the shape of the body. And so the soldiers are able to immediately detect, sitting wherever they are, that this is a child who appears on the screen. And indeed, it is like a game for them. And we have quoted that in the report, where the soldiers say that they can, let me quote this. In the ITVX documentary Breaking Ranks Inside Israel's War, one Israeli soldier described, "The drones, in my opinion, are what most dehumanizes the other side. You see everything on a screen. You drop the bomb. It feels like a game. You can sit in some basement of a house, safe, with your helmet off, scratching your balls, half-dressed, and kill Palestinians." This is a quotation. This is why I say Israeli soldiers have themselves put on the public domain so much incriminating evidence about what they've been doing.
Something that he said there, which sort of like stuck out to me, is like, it's like a game. And from my experience being in the West Bank, especially with them, those soldiers, and watching them shoot at kids throwing stones, these are like soldiers who are like early 20s, right? And they come out into these areas where they're managing a protest, and they show up, and it's literally like it's a fun game for them. It's like a game. Oh, get away before the kid like hits me with a stone in the back, right? And they're shooting at children, right? Whether it's with like rubber-coated steel bullets, which can kill children, by the way. Like, I've seen the effects firsthand of what these bullets can do in terms of, I haven't seen these bullets kill children, but I've seen the effects of these bullets and what they do to the body in different parts, and what the effects are on children when you shoot them, right? I've seen these effects directly. And literally, the thing that I kept describing it as, I remember, it was literally like they were playing a video game. It looked like one side is playing a video game, the other side is protesting because their land is being stolen. And, and occasionally they come in to use live ammunition, and I've seen that as well, because if the protest is bigger and it's a bit more serious, they'll come with live ammunition. And the video game extends to, you know, you shoot a child through the head, or you blow their kneecaps off. And you see them and the way that they celebrate as well when they fire these shots. I remember in one case, there was a specific case where I was reporting on a demonstration that occurred, and it was right across from Beit Il, it's called. It's a settlement which is like near Ramallah. I don't know why I'm trying to locate exactly, but it's near Ramallah, right? And actually, Jared Kushner's like family foundation has like donated to the settlement, and so the soldiers are sort of like on a hilly area, and they're like, you can see them all together like friends, like as if they're in an arcade in a way, and you just see them there like taking, and then a child drops, their kneecap has been shot, and like you can see like, you know, the blood starts coming down, like the kid drops basically, and you sort of see the kid go down, and the bullet, like the sound comes, and then you just look over, and these people, these soldiers are there, standing there, and like celebrating and high-fiving each other. It's like you have just fired live ammunition into a child's kneecap, causing him an injury. Maybe, I don't know, I didn't follow up on what the injury was of that child, but maybe that child is injured for the rest of his life. I don't know. It could have been a life-changing injury. I have no idea. Maybe he did actually recover fully, but you're potentially doing that. And it's like a video game for them. And in this case, it's a video game using a drone where you shoot a breastfeeding baby in the head, and you know exactly what you're shooting. And again, like this is what we see. And this sort of mentality from those soldiers, and by the way, people will say, oh, you can't blame the Israeli soldiers, all of them, they're just following orders. No, I can tell you for a fact, those Israeli soldiers, no, they do what they want. They do what they want. They go mad. They have those open fire orders. They do what they want when they want to do it. And the Israeli military and any sort of restrictions that they used to have, that started going away with, there was a case, I think it was in 2015 now, right? Quite some time ago, right? 2015, something like that, of a soldier called Elor Azaria who got caught on film in Al Khalil shooting a Palestinian who was already injured and on the floor in the head, just to finish him off, just because. And so it caused such outrage at the time, you know, that, and because it was filmed, that eventually he was arrested. So you could imagine what happened. There was uproar from the Israeli military, uproar from Israeli society. They did a donation drive to make him rich. And then, you know, he got a short sentence, came out a hero, like, you know, good treatment, all of that, right? And he didn't properly go away. He committed a murder. He killed someone. But again, it's just a joke. And then the Great Return March in Gaza, again, just, you know, you saw that if you've been following this issue for long enough, you would have seen the videos back in the Great Return March. And I remember having conversations with friends when they were there, journalists, colleagues of mine who were there in the Great Return March, and you just hear the shots go off right in the background. And then you'd see on your social media later that day, the soldiers had posted a video of them laughing because they shot a kid, right? Target practice on children. You see that in the West Bank. You see that in the Gaza Strip. You've been seeing it. They do what they want. So yes, those soldiers are guilty. It's a soldier society. It's a military society. Everyone in that entire society has either been in that genocidal army or knows someone directly related to them, close to them, that is in that army or has been in that army, right? They are all connected to it. That whole society is built around the army. And in fact, there's a book, I think it's called An Army Like No Other, which maybe is good to read, by Haim Breshith. Years ago, actually, like I remember discussing it with him before he released the book. But that sort of explains how Israeli society is if you read that book, right? And it's from someone who would call himself perhaps a former Israeli. So that's something to think about. That is the way they're behaving, and an army that behaves that way, and a leadership that behaves that way, that has backing from its society to do these horrendous things and commit these war crimes, that is an entity that needs to be physically stopped. And we know Western countries are not going to impose sanctions. They're not going to do anything. So the only ones in the entire world that can constrain Israel and that can stop Israel, in this case, from doing the most horrific things to the people of Gaza, this is realistically speaking, is to an extent Hezbollah and Ansarallah, but really Iran. Iran is the only one capable of stopping this. Well, there are others capable, but they just won't. Iran is in the position to do that. And really that's where things stand. And it doesn't matter what your political view is, that's just objectively true. Iran's the only one that could possibly pull this off. And for its own sake, because of the doctrine that it's committed to, because of its whole strategy in the region, closing the Gaza front and getting a deal that includes Gaza is of paramount, like it is so incredibly important to Iran at this point and Iranian security. And I cannot stress that enough. And that is why I believe they have to do this. And so when people ask, it was not a surprise to see this conversation happen between Bassem Naim and Abbas Araghchi. And so with that, I believe that these clashes are still going on in the south of Lebanon. Yes, quite a bit's been happening. And of course, the Israelis bombing. So we will be back on Monday. If you did get this far into the stream, by the way, please do hit that like button. Please do share this. Also, put a comment down below. It does help with the algorithm. And of course, as well, if you do like this show, you do enjoy watching this, us bringing you as well that material from on the ground, the videos that are emerging of the resistance operations, then the target stream is 100% viewer funded. So we are looking for 300 new members. You will be the ones keeping this show alive. So we do urge you to join us. You can join Mint Press on Patreon or right here on YouTube in our membership program. And we thank you for all of your support in different ways that you do support. But if you do want to keep the show going, then we would be massively appreciative. So we will see you again, and we'll be breaking down all of the developments as they happen on Monday, 4 p.m. CST. Until next time, we will see you.